Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my March wrap-up. The first book I finished in March was Untamed Shore by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I buddy read this with my friend Yvette from Book Cave. I think this is marketed as a crime noir, and I'll say right off the bat, I think that one of the reasons maybe this book seems to be hit or miss for people is if you go in expecting a fast-paced thriller, I think you're going to be disappointed, because even though I personally found it very, very compelling to read, I think that the tone and the atmosphere and kind of the build of the story is more in the, along the lines of a kind of mystery or, I don't know, like a psychological thriller. So that's one thing to be aware of, but I really, really enjoyed this. I tend not to like thriller type books, so this really worked for me. I think that Moreno Garcia is so good at creating kind of what I think of as like likable, unlikable characters, in that they're very, like, her main characters are sometimes very abrasive, or like they feel like they would be hard people to get along with, but you still like them and you still care about them and you can see why they are the way that they are. And that's how I felt about our main character, Viridiana. I apologize for my accent there. And so I realized I haven't told you anything about the premise of this book. This book takes place in Baja California in 1979, and our main character, Viridiana, her job is, like, she basically is a tourist guide, and she ends up getting a job with these 3 wealthy Americans who are staying there for a while. So she gets hired by them and she starts spending a lot of time with these people, and then one of them dies in suspicious circumstances, and so then Viridiana gets tangled up in this and like try and figure out what's going on and this family and like their secrets and everything. And yeah, so that's like the premise for the book. And Viridiana also really wants to leave her town. She's been feeling kind of trapped there, which is one of the reasons why she was so pulled in when this family shows up. As the back of the book says, she's magnetized by them, which I think is a good descriptor. And yeah, like this, I just really enjoyed this. I thought the atmosphere was great. I thought that the build of the story was really excellent. Like, I think the tension was built beautifully. I found this a really, really compelling book to read. Like, even though it's not like a fast-paced thriller in that there's like just twist after twist and everything is moving at a really high pace, I found this incredibly compelling, and I just really wanted to know what was going on and what happened. Like I said, I really liked our main character. I thought the other characters were so well developed as well. Whether you liked them or hated them or couldn't make up your mind about them, they were just so well drawn. This book also really makes you think about like where the line is between somebody who's an asshole and you don't like them, and then like somebody who is a bad person and like you deserve what's coming to you kind of thing. I thought that was really, really interesting, the way that was kind of explored here. And I also think the ending is really interesting. I think it really fit the story and our main character, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. I gave Untamed Shore 4 stars. I know that this is, like I said, kind of a book that is hit or miss for people, but it really worked for me. Next, I finished Wundersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the second book in the Nevermore series, or the Trials of Morrigan Crow. What is the name of the series? You guys know the one I mean. Anyway, so I read this book as part of a live show that I was a guest on, so I will link that down below. Thank you so much to Olivia, Savannah, and Sabine for having me on as a guest. I really enjoyed discussing this book with you guys and with the other guests as well. So everyone kind of knows what the series is about, but the first book, we follow our main character, Morrigan Crow, and she has been told, she's grown up thinking that she's cursed, that all the bad things in her town happen because of her, and that she's going to die, I think on her 12th birthday, her 13th birthday, but then the night before or the night of, she gets whisked away by this man named Jupiter North to this magical world of Nevermore. I'm so sorry, I'm bad at remembering these names. I don't know why I'm having such trouble. Yes, Nevermore. And so she is given the opportunity to have a better life. She finds out that she has these magical powers, but the catch is that she has to prove herself, and that she like has to prove that she's good enough to stay and that she belongs here. And so the second book follows on from the first one, and I have very mixed feelings about this series. I'm definitely not loving it the way other people are, which makes me sad. I personally liked this book less than book 1, even though there were some parts I liked more, and I did find it, like, I was more interested reading this one than book 1, but overall I think I liked it less. I did give this book 3 stars, and I think the first one I gave like 3.5 or 3.75. Which honestly might be a little generous in hindsight, because like I'm just very disappointed in these books. Like, first off, I really do love that these books are getting people who don't normally read middle grade to try middle grade, that they're getting into it. That just fills my heart with so much joy. So I'm very happy about that. But the books themselves, I've just been disappointed in. And I think part of that is because I read so much middle grade, and I read so much middle grade fantasy. Like, so not that like popular ones are automatically less good or of lesser quality, but I just think that I have read so many great ones that coming to this one was a bit of a letdown. So I'll start with the things I liked, because there were a few things I enjoyed about this book. I liked the kind of magical school setting. Some of that, I do think we could have gotten more of that. I liked a couple of the side characters, not a ton, or not as many as I was hoping to. I also liked some of the kind of like subplots of this book. Like there were a couple of really minor characters or really minor storylines that I just found very, very fascinating. I was very interested in those. And then, like I said, I was actually much more engaged in reading this book than I was the first one. Like when I was actually reading this book, I would fly through it pretty quickly, but when I wasn't reading it, I didn't really feel motivated to pick it up. And that leads me into the things I did not enjoy about this one. So okay, sadly there's a lot. First off, the characters I have found pretty disappointing. Morgan as a main character, I just don't think she's super well developed. Like she feels kind of generic in a lot of ways, at least to me. And I also got really tired of kind of some of the storyline of this book, where it's like basically we're just following Morgan around as she's bullied and as people ignore her, and it's like, I don't know, I kind of was hoping we'd get to a point in the series where she finds her group of people, and like some of that starts to happen, and she does have some people in her life who care about her, but it's like basically just different settings of people being awful to Morgan because of the powers that she has, which I found very frustrating and just unpleasant to read. I also think a lot of the supporting characters that we were supposed to like were kind of a letdown. I feel kind of bad because like it has been, okay, a couple years since I read the first book, but I normally don't have that much trouble remembering things between books in a series. I had literally forgotten the existence of her best friend. His name is Hawthorne. I'm sorry, Hawthorne, but it's like he's on page for the first time in this book, and I'm like, who's this guy? And then there's something said about like, oh yeah, how they became friends during the first book, and he's like one of the most important people to Morgan, and I'm like, oh, sorry. So I feel like some of the characters are pretty forgettable. Also some of the characters at the hotel, like I like the setting of the hotel, but it just, I don't know, all of the quirky and interesting characters feel very surface level to me. As far as the plot, like I mentioned, I didn't really like the emphasis on like bullying and like people just being awful to Morgan. Like I understand why that happens based on the plot, but I think there still could have been more balance with other plot lines or other plot elements. I also like hated the like twists or the things like the surprises in this book. I think they were so lazy, and they were those story elements that like make the story less interesting. Like yes, it's shocking or it's supposed to be surprising, but to the detriment of characterization and of like the actual like the whole story itself. I found that very frustrating. And like there's a point where one of the antagonists actually says to Morgan, when they're like explaining their motivations, they're like, I can't explain it. And I feel like that really sums up how I felt about this reveal. It's like, yeah, that's because it's inexplicable. I just found that very, very irritating. It was clearly just there for shock. I don't feel like it was well developed, like that element was well developed throughout the book, and even allowing for, okay, you want to surprise the reader, so you're not going to lay a lot of breadcrumbs. I still think there are ways to make it feel like less of a cheat, and that felt like a cheat to me. And another really big issue I had, and probably one of the major issues I'm having with this series, is I feel like the tone is done really, really badly. Like I feel like the like whimsical, fun, light elements are really not well balanced with the really heavy, dark stuff. Like without getting too much into spoilers, there's essentially a like magical human trafficking plotline in this book, which was a surprise. But the way that that is contrasted with the like everybody rides around on their umbrellas and it's so cute and everything, like I feel like that was just done really badly, and it didn't feel intentional. Like I don't feel like we were supposed to feel that, like I don't think it was supposed to feel that jarring. Like for example, Furthermore by Tahara Mafi, that book has that dark whimsy, like that that contrast between like what it seems like bright and fun, but then there's a lot of darkness underneath. I think that book does a really good job with it, and it feels intentional. This series does not feel intentional. It just feels messy. Anyway, I feel like I've been I sound really angry. I'm not like actually mad about this book. I'm just disappointed. Like I just want to love these books like everyone else is, and I'm just not. So I haven't decided if I'm going to continue the series or not. This book was just very okay for me, and yeah, I'm sad about it. Next, I finished Irish Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends by Kieran Fanning. I really like this cover, by the way, and this is a collection of, obviously, Irish Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends. It's divided up into different sections. So there are fairy tales and folklore, the mythological cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the Fenian cycle. So they have a few from each of those categories. Like, they don't have obviously all of the legends or myths or anything. But I really liked this. Like, I just tend to really enjoy books like this, and I think this was a fun one. I liked that there were some tales that I was familiar with and some that I didn't really know about. I was a little sad that the sickbed of Cuchulainn wasn't in here, because that's one of my favorite Irish legends, but that's okay. There were a couple that I did not know very well that I ended up really enjoying. I think some of the humor of this book was good. It's funny because something that was also kind of funny about this book is it's written in a very kind of simple and accessible style. Like, I think this is definitely intended to be accessible for kids reading this book, which is totally fine. But the funny thing about that is that the writing was so matter-of-fact that I think it made the fairy tale logic of some of these stories sound even weirder. Because I feel like sometimes when you're reading fairy tales, the particular writing style can almost gloss over a little bit of that weird logic or like lack of logic, because you're just in the fairy tale mindset, you know, so you're like, this doesn't make sense, but I'm going with it. Whereas here, because the language was so straightforward, it made those like plot transitions that don't make sense. It really drew attention to the fact that they don't make sense. It made like character motivation sound very weird sometimes, but that wasn't a big deal. It was just something that was kind of like funny or interesting to notice. And I also like that before each story you got a little bit of like context or backstory on like where this story was from, or sometimes kind of prior like legends that chronologically took place before this one. Like, they gave you backstory about previous events, and I give this book 4 stars. Next, I finished a picture book, and that is Around America to Win the Vote: 2 Suffragists, a Kitten, and 10,000 Miles by Mara Rockcliffe, illustrated by Hadley Hooper. So this is a picture book about 2 suffragists and a kitten who did a 10,000 mile tour of the United States to raise support for the women's suffrage movement in the US. And this is just like a fun picture book that talks about some of the stops they had, some of their experiences. These women were really like celebrities, like while they were on their journey. They were really kind of, I think, early, like I said, celebrities, and like people would follow their journey, people knew who they were, people would like turn out in the streets to greet them when they got to their city and things like that. I did also like the art style. It was like bright and fun. The only thing I didn't like about this one, and this is like the pet mom in me coming out, but I didn't like that this is clearly geared for pretty young children. Like, there's not a lot of words on each page. I imagine it's supposed to be read, again, to young children or maybe even young kids reading it by themselves. And it bothered me a little bit that there was like no reference to the fact that you shouldn't actually do this with pets. Like, the fact that they took this cat in the car with them. There's also like a scene where the cat eats pieces of cake, which I think actually happened, and it's like, I'm probably overthinking this, but I just think, considering that this is supposed to be a nonfiction book and that it's intended for young readers, I think that would have been a good opportunity to teach kids, like, this is something that they did back then, but we know better. Like, food is bad for pets, and like, you shouldn't take them in a car when they don't have like a box or like a carrier or something to keep them safe and things like that. So that was the only like downside of this one, is that bothered me, and I wish there had been a little bit more like addressing of that. But other than that, I thought this was a nice book, and I liked getting to know these 2 women and their experiences and everything, and this interesting piece of suffrage history. Next, I finished Enna Burning by Shannon Hale. This is the second book in the Books of Bayern series, which is a series of companion novels. They do take place chronologically, but you were following a different character in each one, and this was a buddy read with my friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly. And I really enjoyed this. I can definitely see why this is a very polarizing book in the series. Some people, it's their favorite, and some people, they think it's like the worst in the series. And I also think that this probably would be closer to a young adult book than a middle grade book, just because of the content, and not because of the type of content, because middle grade can handle very heavy issues, but I think the level of detail you get is closer to a young adult than a middle grade. So that's also something to know going in. But I thought this was a really well done book. So we're following Enna as a main character, and there is some conflict between the kingdom of Bayern and another country, and Enna ends up getting tangled up in the war effort and this dangerous magic that she has. So she's trying to do her best to help Bayern and also to keep herself safe, because she ends up being put in some really dangerous situations, and so she's trying to figure out what she can do to help her country while also surviving in these really bad situations. I really liked Enna as a main character. She's really smart, and she's really strong, and she's so brave and resilient even in the face of these really like awful things that she is going through. And I really felt for her as she is trying to figure out like how to stay true to her conscience while also doing what needs to be done. I thought the antagonist of this book was just disturbingly effective. Yeah, very, very well drawn as a character in a very scary way. I also think this book, and like the series in general, I think, I think this book does a really good job of showing consequences for things. Like, if you're somebody who, when you read fantasy, you like magic to have a price, or just like books in general, you like to see consequences for decisions, you like to see characters deal with those, I think you might really get along with this one, because I think that was done very well here. I think that was a pretty prominent focus, is Enna having to make difficult decisions and then deal with the consequences of those. And sometimes there isn't a good choice, or there isn't a choice that she feels good about or comfortable with, and she has to make one anyway. I'm also really impressed with the way that Shannon Hale can weave in these little world building details that then become more important later. I always really like the writing of her books. I think she has this really smooth writing style. I also was pretty satisfied with the resolution for this book. Like, I think the way it played out made sense and it felt earned. Yeah, I really liked this one. There were a couple of things I didn't like as much. Like, one of them is just like, on a purely enjoyment level, some of this book was not fun to read because it wasn't supposed to be, which I don't know that I necessarily like took points off for this, because again, this book is not supposed to be fun and light all the time, but some parts of it were very difficult to read because it kind of felt like you were watching somebody become addicted to a dangerous substance, like a drug. Like, it really did feel like you were watching somebody struggle with addiction at some points during the book, and it was very effective and very well done, but it was just hard to read sometimes. I think some of the plot developments happened in a way that felt kind of like just to move the story along, if that makes sense. And then one of my big issues was the character of Finn. He was fine and I liked him, but honestly his defining personality trait seemed to be that he was not like another character, which is good because that other character was terrible, but I just like would have liked to see him stand on his own a little bit more as far as characterization. I found him pretty dull. Yeah, didn't really, like, he didn't really draw me in as a character, and given his role in the book, I would have liked to feel a little more connected to him. But overall, I thought this was a really excellent book. Again, I see why there's very mixed opinions on this book, but I thought it was really well done, and I gave Enna Burning 4 stars. Next, I finished Blood and Beauty. The subtitle is A Novel of the Borgias, and this is by Sarah Dunnant. So this was part of the Read the Renaissance book club that I am reading along with. I will link the live show down below that Julia and Helen did. Julia from Shakespeare and Such and Helen from Pages and Peaches. And the first couple books, they were a historical fiction and a nonfiction about Lucrezia Borgia, and this is the historical fiction book. Okay, I did not like this, and like, one of the reasons I was excited to read these is because I have personally never had any interest in the Borgias, so I was curious to see if my experience with these books would like prove me right or maybe make me a little more interested in them. And so far, no, I still don't care about the Borgias, but I did find Lucrezia herself a really interesting figure, and I would be interested in reading a little more about her and maybe about some of the other women in these books. But like the story of this one, so Lucrezia is on the cover of my edition, but it's really not about her, or it's like only about her in kind of a superficial plot way, because we're following a lot of different characters. We focus way too much on her brother Cesare, who is the worst. We also focus a lot on her father, Rodrigo, who was the, what pope was he? Pope Alexander VI, who his birth name was Rodrigo Borgia. He's kind of like the patriarch of the family at this point, so we focus a lot on him. And then it's just like about the political manipulations that this family does, the way that they consolidate power in the church, the way that they're like trying to conquer other Italian like city-states. And yeah, like, I don't really know how to summarize the plot of this book, because it felt like, honestly, nothing happened, even though a lot of like really large scale things were happening. It just felt so slow and like really boring, honestly. I really didn't like the characters that we focused on. Like, I don't understand this fascination with Cesare Borgia. I kind of thought going in that we were going to focus more on Lucrezia and like her choices, and I don't really feel like we did. Like, the majority of the plot was just like the political sneakiness that her family was getting up to, which a lot of the other families at the time were doing too. And yeah, Lucrezia was not as prominent a figure in this as I thought she was going to be, which was a shame, because I actually really liked the way she was characterized. She was actually much closer to what we think she was like historically than like this reputation she's gotten as this like horrible woman who did all of these like shocking and disturbing things and horrible things. So I liked the characterization of Lucrezia. I also liked the glimpses we got of the other female characters. Like I said in my Goodreads review, something like, imagine the possibilities if we had given 90% of Cesare's page time to literally any of the female characters, and I stand by that. Like, they were so much more interesting than him, than like any of the male characters, and this book has kind of made me, I think, formulate my hypothesis for why that is, like why in historical fiction or nonfiction the women are often so much more compelling even when they get very little page time, and I think it's because of that. I think it's because these women have to do so much with so little, that just makes them very compelling and very interesting, whereas like with some of these male characters, it's like, yeah, you had things handed to you on a silver platter, of course you can do, like, of course you can conquer all these places and you can gather all this glory and you can be this figure that everybody knows, and like you can be this famous person, you know, whereas with the women, they had so little to work with, they had so many restrictions on them, and so to see them still be interesting or to still try and make their own way is much more interesting and much more impressive. Anyway, so I think that's the reason why, but it made for a very dull book a lot of times because the women were just not in this book enough. Again, we just spent so much time with Cesare and he was so boring and gross. I just hated those chapters so much because like, he's just the worst. Like, he's awful. Sarah Dunnett like included something that he's like the Borgias are famous for that almost certainly never actually happened, which was weird because she was like incredibly research focused on like a lot of the rest of this book. But when it came to things like this, she kind of ignored historical records in order to make, I guess, what she thought was a more interesting or dramatic story, which was weird because like her author's note, it kind of like the introductory note at the beginning of the book, it kind of seems like she's, one of the reasons she's writing this book is to kind of like, I guess, go against the stereotypes of the Borgias and tell a more honest story based on them. But then it's like with things like this where it's like, so you just copied the drama? I don't understand. But anyway, so like she played into that for Cesare, which is one of the things that just made him a really disgusting character, and I hated him. And he's not even interesting. I don't understand this fixation on him by like certain historical writers because he's not even that interesting really. Like, all of his scenes were so repetitive. Like, it was always him being a creep to his sister, or like having somebody murdered, or just like swaggering around and like thinking about how great he was and like how he's gonna plan to take over the world or whatever. And like, just over and over. Like, he was in this book so much and he did like the same thing every time, and I just don't like some of the scenes with him. It's like the book was trying to get us to feel like, oh no, like what is Cesare going to do next? And it's like probably the things he's been doing the entire damn book. Yeah, can you tell I did not like him or his sections in this book? I was also not a big fan of the writing. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was just incredibly overwritten and like just so much detail that we did not need, and some of the descriptions for things were like pretty disgusting. Like, I did not need that level of detail about these old men having sex with our teenage mistresses, and like some of the adjectives they used, I was like, I would like this to be wiped from my memory, please. Yeah, just not pleasant. And it was done in a way that was like, I think Sarah Dunnett thought that this is how you have to be, like this is how you have to write in order to be like a serious historical fiction writer. And it's like, you can be honest about the bad things of the time period without using words like that. And then like, speaking of the language again, I was only a couple pages into this book and I was like, I can already tell this book does not need to be 500 pages. And I was right, it did not. It was just so overwritten. Like I said, there wasn't actually a lot of action. Like, there were big plot things that happened, but they took so long, which, you know, makes sense with this like sweeping historical story or whatever, but it just felt so slow and so boring. And again, we were just buried under all this writing that we didn't need. I also was not a fan of the historical choices that Sarah Dunnett made, like, because I don't know a lot about the Borgias, so I googled some things about what actually happened, because I'm like, okay, well, it's not, I can't get mad at the author for her storytelling choices if they're actually like historical fact. So I looked that up to make sure that I was like to figure out which was which. But there were some things that she put in here that are not historical fact, and again, it seemed like she was just putting them in here for like maximum drama and maximum tragedy for Lucrezia, which really bugged me. It's like, this poor girl has suffered enough. Like, why would you need to like make her story worse than it was? Like, I don't understand that. Also, as you can probably tell from the things I've been saying about the plot, I think this book felt like kind of unfocused, or like I wasn't really sure what the intention was with this story. It kind of, again, the introduction kind of made it seem like the intention of this book was to show that the Borgias were not necessarily any worse than these other families, which I think like is a reasonable argument, because like honestly, a lot of the things that they were doing, like all of the rich families in Italy were doing, but I just don't feel like we kept to that. I also think this book was attempting to center the women a little bit more, and I don't think it succeeded there. There's actually like this one really fantastic quote out of all this like overwritten crap, honestly, that I think was actually really brilliant, and I wish that that energy had been present throughout the book. Every woman who walks through the world knows that there are two roads, a wide triumphal route for the men and a second mean little alley for women. Freedom is so much men's due that even to draw attention to it is to make them angry. Like, what a brilliant line. What a promising theme to explore. And then like nothing was done with that. Like that was honestly the best line in the book. And just, yeah, like there was no follow through with that content or with that theme. I also think this book was just incredibly confusing, and to be fair, as I've been saying, I don't know as much about the Borgias as I do about other historical figures, so maybe that was part of the reason, but I just think like this was a really hard book to follow sometimes, because it's like, all right, well, I know that these two cities are fighting, but why? Like, there was this huge plot point that was involving like the alliances between two other like city-states or kingdoms, and like that was influencing a lot of what the Borgias were doing, and it's like I can't figure out who is aligned with who because that wasn't clarified. And like, I don't know, I know that it's historical fiction, so you want to do things with context rather than like explaining things to the reader, but I think you could have done that better. Like I think that Sarah Dunnett could have done that more effectively and still kept this reading like a novel. And then finally, the author's note at the end, there were a couple things about it that really, really rubbed me the wrong way. And this is a case where maybe if I had enjoyed the rest of the book more, I would have given her the benefit of the doubt with some of these things, or I wouldn't have thought so badly of her based on these couple things in the author's note. But who knows? I don't know if that would have helped my feelings about it, because it just left me with a really bad taste in my mouth in addition to really disliking this book. Although again, like Lucrezia, a highlight. Some of the other female characters, a highlight. There were a couple of scenes, like most of the scenes involving the female characters were really great. There's a really beautiful one at the end where Lucrezia is getting ready to leave Rome, I think. Yeah, so like there were a few things that were good about this book, but overall I really hated it. And I gave Blood and Beauty 2.5 stars, although like given all of the ranting and complaining I've been doing, this is a case where I'm like, maybe that was a little generous, but like there was some good stuff here, just not a lot. Next, I finished 9 Coaches Waiting by Mary Stewart. So I have gotten into Mary Stewart thanks to my friend Mary Margaret. This is one of her favorite authors. She was writing in, I think like around the 50s maybe, and she wrote romantic suspense primarily, which I had never read before, but I am really enjoying the way that she does it. So in this book, we're following our main character, Linda, and she actually grew up in France, but she hasn't lived there for a long time. She left after the deaths of her parents. So she's been at an English boarding school, and she got a job there, but she wasn't super happy there. So when she gets an opportunity to be a governess in France, like for this family, like for this boy and this wealthy family, she jumps at the chance because she wants to go back home. And even though there's some kind of weird qualifications about the job, she's really excited for this opportunity. So she goes back to France and she takes this job. And things get weird. Like there seems to be some, like this family has a lot of secrets in their past, and like just the atmosphere of this book, it's like it's very uncertain. Like Linda's trying to figure out who she can trust and what's actually going on with this family. Like if there actually is anything sinister going on, or if it's just like the sad like past and events of this family. And I really loved this book. I am really enjoying Mary Stewart's writing. This is only the second book that I've read from her, but I really like the way that she writes. I found Linda a really enjoyable main character. She's really clever and smart, and like when she makes questionable choices, you understand why she's making them, and sometimes they're even ones where like I'm reading it and I'm like, this seems like a bad idea, but I would probably do this too, kind of thing, which goes a long way for me to like making a character that I'm not frustrated with. Is like, if they make choices where I'm like, that's a bad idea, but I can see myself doing that, like, that's fine. I'm okay with that. She's like very practical. Again, she's very smart, but she's also incredibly compassionate. Like watching her get to know her young charge, this boy Philippe, who's the boy that she is the governess for. Watching them get to know each other, and like Philippe slowly start to like kind of open up to her, and like just this really lovely like family relationship, like found family relationship between the two of them is just wonderful to see. I just loved Philippe as a character too. Like he is just like, I just wanted to like give him a hug and tell him things were gonna be okay, and like never let anything bad happen to him again. He was such a lovely character, and when he's first introduced, like I wasn't really sure about him, like because he's very standoffish for very believable reasons, but like he's written in a way where it's like you couldn't tell like what kind of character he was gonna be, but I ended up loving him so much, and just he was so well written too, like so well developed. And again, this like with my very limited experience with Mary Stewart books, but I talked to Mary Margaret about this, and she said that she feels like this too. She is so good at writing fully fleshed out kid characters, which I think can be, it can feel like a very rare talent when you're reading a book that is not a middle grade. So often when you're reading books with older characters that are like the central characters, and then there's also kids in the book, it can so often feel like they're just plot devices, or like they're just there to move the story along, or they're just there for almost like set dressing, you know, for the story or for like the adult characters. And like I never felt like that here. The atmosphere of this book was so good, like that mystery and that building tension as you're trying to figure out like what is going on. And something that I think is really cool about the couple of Mary Stuart books I read is that the mystery elements of her books, the enjoyment of them is not dependent on you not knowing what's coming, if that makes sense. Like even if you see something coming, or even if you suspect something is going to happen, like seeing the story build up to that is still so enjoyable, which I really liked. And I also think she does a good mix for me as a reader of like some things I figured out and I was like, all right, I'm feeling good that I saw this coming. And then there's a couple things that really surprised me. This was also just an incredibly compelling book to read. I feel like I've been using that word a lot lately in wrap-ups, but honestly, I could not put this book down. Like I stayed up so late finishing this because I just had to know what was going to happen. I had to know what, like, how things were going to turn out. Like this really was one of those books where like I couldn't make myself put it down to go do other things or to go to bed. So yeah, it was just like a very engrossing reading experience. And I really loved this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. There were a couple of things I didn't love as much. One of them is just, for my personal taste, I think that Mary Stuart could have lightened up a little bit on the like very detailed landscape descriptions. Like they weren't bad or anything, but I just think that we didn't need quite as many of those as we got. And then there was also a character who I think was being pretty unreasonable about something that happened. And I don't know, I feel like that should have been dealt with differently, because I was kind of like, okay, I see why you are hurt by this, but considering the stakes here, I think you're being a little unreasonable. But anyway, like overall, I really loved this book, and as I said, I gave 9 Coaches Waiting 4.5 stars. Next, I finished Heartbeat Braves by Pamela Sanderson. This is the first book in the Crooked Rock series, which is a romance series. Pamela Sanderson is a citizen of the Karuk tribe, and I don't think the characters in the book, I don't think it's ever stated what their tribal affiliation is, and I really enjoyed this. I read this as part of the Indigenous Romance Read-Along that has been co-hosted by Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter and Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany. And I think for the live show for this one, they also had a guest who's Kim from Native Lady Book Warrior, who I also love. I'm really sad that like at the last minute I had something come up where I couldn't watch the live show, but I will link that down below and I'm gonna try and catch up on that. But yeah, so this romance novel, we're following our two main characters, Henry and Rayanne. And Rayanne works at the Crooked Rock Urban Indian Center, which is a nonprofit that is geared towards providing resources and outreach for Indigenous people who live in the city rather than on a reservation. And this nonprofit, it seems like they're kind of struggling with just getting the resources that they need. Like they're trying to prove to the board of directors that they are doing really important work and that they need their continued monetary support rather than them like pulling the plug and giving those resources elsewhere. So there's a lot at stake here, and it kind of seems like things keep going wrong with their events that they're trying to set up. And then Henry shows up, and he is actually related to one of the people on the board who's kind of told them to like get Henry involved like with a job there as a favor to him, to this person on the board. And Rayanne is not happy about that because essentially Henry gets given he gets put in charge of the project that she has been working on and that is supposed to be her project. And Henry doesn't even want to be there, to make it worse. And so things kind of go from there. Most of the book we see these characters working on this event that they're going to put on, and as Henry and Rayanne spend more time together, of course they get to know each other better and feelings start developing. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I was not sure I was going to at the beginning because Henry I found very frustrating and unlikable at the beginning of this book. And it wasn't so much because of his personality, although that was part of it. It was because we weren't really given good reasons for the way he was acting. Like, it was just very frustrating because he like continuously would get angry that people were trying to help him, and like we were never given any information why he might have had a bad experience with this, like why he would maybe be offended that people were trying, like people he cares about and who care about him are like trying to help him. Like we get a little bit more of that backstory later about like how maybe people in his life were kind of treating him like he needed help even before he did, and like how, you know, that would be very frustrating. So we got a little bit of justification for it later, but for like the first chunk of this book, it was just Henry, it struck me as just Henry being very stubborn and like getting very angry about people trying to help him and not really coming up with alternative ideas, I guess. I just personally find it very frustrating to read about characters who are refusing help and getting offended at people offering help. It's like, needing help from the people you love is not a weakness, so I thought that was kind of frustrating. If we had just gotten reasons for it, that would have made it a lot better. So yeah, like Henry personality-wise, I was not a big fan of at the beginning, but as the book went on, I really ended up enjoying him. I liked Rayanne's character from the beginning. I just really enjoyed her. And as we got to know Henry more and we got actually like more development for him, I ended up being very invested in his character and in his character development. I really liked the romance between Rayanne and Henry, and I was also really impressed because in general, I get bored when like characters actually end up in a romantic relationship. Like I lose interest at that point. Whereas with this book, I actually enjoyed their romance more. Like the further on in the book we got, like once they were together, I was still invested and I was actually more invested. Like I really wanted to see them make it work. I also really liked the plot elements. Like I was really invested in this Crooked Rock Urban Indian Center, and like I just wanted to see them like make it and like get the funding that they needed, and I wanted like this event to go off well and everything. It was also interesting because some of these things were like familiar to me. Like I obviously don't have the exact same job Rayanne does or anything, but I have worked in like somewhat similar jobs that she has, and so like I totally got that frustration. I totally got the stress about like getting funding for projects and like reminding people that you do important work in the community. So that was like an unexpected thing that I really enjoyed about this book, is like that connection. I also really enjoyed the side characters, and I really loved the humor of this book. I feel like we got a lot more of that as the book went on, because like at the beginning I didn't have I didn't really like have any particular feelings about the writing, but like some of the banter and the dialogue between these characters was so much fun. Like I actually laughed out loud while reading this book a few times. Like that happened a few times, and that almost never happens with me when I read. Like some of the dialogue between Rayanne and Henry was just so fun and so funny, and also with some of the other characters as well. Like with the friend group, their conversations were sometimes just really funny and entertaining. I also love that there's not really a third act breakup in this book. That always makes me happy. And then also I was trying to think of like how to describe the way that the sex scenes are done. Bethany described these as like closed door sex scenes, which they are. I feel like those were written really well. I also really love, like one of my favorite things about this book was like the thematic content and like the way that this book talks about things like Native peoples living in cities and like how they like they're sometimes cut off from the kind of community support that other natives get on reservations. There's also a big emphasis on the needs of native elders in the communities, and yeah, I just like really loved the thematic aspects of this book. I really enjoyed this. The only like downsides for me really were one, Henry's characterization at the beginning, and then also, even though I really enjoyed their romance as the book went on, I felt like at the beginning and kind of the middle, like it focused a lot more on like the attraction between them rather than like their personalities matching really well. Because I do think that Rayanne and Henry make a really great couple, and like they really balance each other in great ways. And once we got into that, I really loved their romance, but I just feel like there was a while at the beginning where it's like, well, why are you interested in them? Is it just because they're incredibly attractive kind of thing? Which I found like less interesting. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave Heartbeat Braves 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the series. And then the last book I'm going to talk about today is The Night Gardener by Jonathan Auxier, and this was another Betty read with my friend Callie. And this is a kind of like spooky middle grade book. We're following 2 siblings, Molly and Kip, and they are on their own in England. They're Irish, they're originally from Ireland, but they're in England now trying to find work, and they're by themselves. They're not, they don't have their parents with them or anything, and they get a job at this like really creepy manor house that like all the other townspeople don't want to go near. Like there's like this weird forest that nobody wants to go near, but they need the job, so they take the job there, and strange things start happening. So they're trying to figure out like what is going on with this house and this family and these weird things that they start noticing and that start happening. And I really liked this. I thought this was a really great like middle grade spooky novel, which is like the kind of creepiness that I enjoy usually. I really loved the atmosphere of this book. Like that spooky atmosphere was just very well done. There were a couple parts that were like genuinely really scary and like kind of freaky, where we were really shocked at like how creepy it was. I also like that this book talks a little bit about the treatment of Irish people in England at this time, which was really bad, and like how Molly and Kip are having to deal with that. Kip also has he walks with a limp, he has a crutch, and so there's some discussion about that as well, and like the way that people treated disabled people at this time, and like Molly really sticks up for him. I also liked some of the thematic elements of this book, like about storytelling and the difference between a lie and a story. And I thought some of the themes about family were also very interesting. And I also loved Kip as a character. Like he was honestly like the MVP of this book. Like I just loved him, and I was so scared for him, and I wanted him to be okay. And I did like his and Molly's sibling relationship, but Molly kind of frustrated me at times because she's older. There were a few times where I was like, okay, but you should know better than this. Like, you're older and you should be like taking care of yourself and your brother, like your younger brother. So that was like a little frustrating. Like, I got kind of annoyed with her sometimes. But overall, I liked them as main characters. And yeah, I just think this book was really well done. The only like downsides for me, besides Molly sometimes getting on my nerves, or making some very poor choices, which I think some of those choices were kind of explained by plot things later, but there were a few I think that weren't, and that just like, I don't know, kind of bugged me. So besides that, like, I think that parts of the middle also could have been done in a less frustrating way, because one of the things I was really enjoying about the book is the way that this is a great example of how you can still have a compelling mystery and story without having the main characters like make dumb choices with these certain things. And then they kind of did that, Molly in particular. So I found that frustrating near the middle. And then also there was a like minor story element related to one of the kids of this wealthy family. There was this very minor plot element related to one of them that honestly felt pretty fatphobic at parts, and I don't think that was really challenged. Like you did get a little bit of backstory about it, but I just think the way that it was written and like handled in the story was not the best. It could have been done, I think, with more sensitivity. But overall, I did really like this book. I think if you're looking for some creepy middle grade, this is a really great one. And also it was cool because in the author's note, Jonathan Oxay talks about some of his inspirations for this book, and one of them was The Secret Garden, which I mentioned in my book haul. I mentioned that like part of the premise or the atmosphere for this book reminded me of like The Secret Garden a little bit, but you know, spooky or creepy. So that was kind of cool being proven right. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed this. I gave The Night Gardener 4 stars, and thank you so much to my friend Katie from A Sea of Tomes for gifting this book to me. I really enjoyed it. Okay, everybody, so those are all the books I read for the first part of March. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. And let me know the last book you read that you felt like you just really couldn't put it down. Like you physically could not make yourself put it down and go and do other things. Because that's how I felt with 9 Coaches Waiting, and it was honestly just a very enjoyable experience to be that engrossed in a book. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!